I was very young when I started, and I just went to research about different angles to study about out-of-body experience. I wouldn't even call that. I would say experience that would evidence that we exist beyond the physical body. And I came to find different groups, different organizations. None of them suit me much because there were some explanations that to me didn't make sense. It's just, based on a cosmic ray that comes and you are special and you
Yeah.
are something that is more evolved and mysterious. And I wanted more objective explanation. And so for me now, even though we study more in a scientific area to understand all of this, I think it makes much more sense because we can state what we know and what we don't know, what we need more research about, and what is already well established. So I think that is a line that we have to establish in this field.
Yes, it's mixing together the objectivity and the subjectivity, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
Because as we say, a lot of people will dismiss this phenomena or these phenomena because they don't adhere to the standard scientific approach of replicability, peer review, and future testable predictions. So they're dismissed as pseudoscience.
Yes. Which shows they don't understand what we are talking about.
Right.
That is the problem, yes. And maybe that's one of the nice things for us to address, because people who want to study the phenomena, they must understand the phenomena. They cannot study without understanding. And vice versa, those who have the phenomena, just experience it, they must understand the theories and the knowledge already amassed behind it to make sense of what they experience. And that is what would be perfect if we could put together.
Yes. And I think that's beginning to happen very slowly as it's becoming more widely known amongst the population.
I agree with you. Yeah.
So did this research for you all begin with your own experience or from hearing of others' experiences?
It began, I think, from my own experiences and interest, but I don't remember a moment in my life when I was not interested about what is it that we are doing here. And I think for most people, it's just about what is going to be my career and how am I going to make money.
Yes, yeah.
And for me, it was what is it that I take with me from this life? How do I grow within? And this is what I have been pursuing since ever. So who are we actually? How do we grow within? Because I really feel inside of myself that what is ours, what we have learned, nobody can take from us, but everything else can be taken from us. And so I thought when I was a child that I would find it in psychology. So I pursued for a moment to study psychology, which I ended up studying like a master in psychology and understanding better. But at a certain point, I understood that psychology was not what I was looking for. I was looking for something more ample. And I started then studying consciousness. And what's the nature of consciousness? We talk so much about consciousness being what identify ourselves, and we can feel the sense of being alive and seeing the world, but nobody really can explain what consciousness is. And from everything that I have experienced and what makes sense also, it's not only my experience, I think it makes sense. I think it explains well the world. We have to be something beyond the brain. How can we be just a result of cells and what is in our neurons? It makes so much more sense that we exist beyond the brain. So I think that that fits perfectly.
Many would dispute that and say that observationally we can see that the consciousness is just a product of interactions between neurons and electrochemical interactions. Although we don't certainly know how exactly those interactions produce consciousness, we can see evidentially that the consciousness is in the brain. How would you respond to that?
I would say that this is just a way of explaining superficially, because nobody can prove that consciousness, awareness, a sense of self is in the brain. So, okay, if everything comes to a point in which we cannot prove this one, I think we have more evidences of the other side, because we do have many cases of near-death experiences, some of them that we cannot just dismiss, some of them in which brings very strong evidences of people being able to be conscious and manifest and perceive information much beyond the brain. We also have, and many people don't know, very serious studies on past life
Yes.
experiences. And most people think, this is just a fantasy. I agree. For many people who say about this is just a fantasy, because people just, choose to believe they were Cleopatra or Mark Antony or
Yeah,
something like
yeah.
that.
It's always
But
Cleopatra, isn't it?
yes, it's always. So it has to be something fancy. Nobody was a John Doe something.
No.
But in a way, the studies that already exist, that are serious studies, they bring information that we cannot just discard. Also, the huge number of people describing experiences beyond the physical body, in which I include myself. I have had experience since very early age. I did not know about the phenomena. I did not pursue it. I had information that was confirmed. But also in my career, in a way, in what I do, talking to so many people, I have people that come to me that they never studied about the phenomena, but they have had experience since very early age. But my point, and what for me keeps making me interested in studying more and more about this, is that the description that these people bring about how they sense living the body, what they see outside the body, what happens to them, how they bring the recollection, how it affects them in everyday life, and all of this. It's so consistent among all of those people of different nations, different cultures, that they different social levels, different educational levels. So we cannot just say this is an imagination, this is a dream. There's got to be something else there. From my personal experience, I have had situations in which I witnessed things outside the body that I could not know. One of them that I tell in my TEDx talk, because it was very impactful for me. It was one of the things that, when I started researching about out-of-body experience, came to my mind, and I said, yeah, we cannot continue just denying that there is something there, because my experience points to it. And so many experiences of so many other people related throughout history. I don't know, Darren, if you ever heard about a researcher called Robert Krukel.
I haven't.
Robert Krukel was an Englishman. He's not very known in the area. Most people talk more about those who teach, techniques and tell about their stories. Robert Krukel was not someone who had a lot of experience, but he was unbiased enough and serious enough to think, I'm going to study about this phenomenon that people talk about. And he was capable of start listening to so many people, compiling stories. And most of his books is based on accounts of people who never met each other, people who never studied. And he himself doesn't seem to have had experiences. He starts from a point of just curious about what is it that people talk about. And his books are one of the big assets we have to compare different out-of-body experience and see what are the common points and start understanding what is beyond life. We cannot deny. Can I make another point here?
Keep going.
Yes, thank you. We cannot deny that in our culture, we always had somehow the knowledge that something else exists. But humankind tried to explain it through different means, and not being educated enough to understand what I call multidimensional science, because it's not a science of the physical world only. It's a science that involves also non-physical levels of reality, that different phenomena point to that. So when we have people experiencing things and trying to explain, and they do not have enough experience and knowledge to understand this, they start explaining in ways that, would make sense to them, in the same way that long ago or primitive people would explain thunder as, punishment from God. And now so many people explain their experience as, God's intervening with them, or Satan around, or they haven't had a vision of the future because it's a mystical religious experience. And I think if we grow more and more in understanding all of these phenomena, we will see that there are common points, and we will start understanding what's in there. So instead of believing that God is sending thunder to us, we will start mastering electricity. And the equivalent to that, in my analogy, is that instead of just thinking something happened to me because it was a coincidence or I was blessed enough, we'll be able to think something happened to me for a reason, because there are elements of my own manifestation that I still do not understand, and they are beyond the brain. There is one thing, the last one I'm going to comment, and I will let you continue, Darren. But you know that in some cases of severe Alzheimer's, and there are some very, very interesting, good scientists researching that. But in this field of Alzheimer's, there is one phenomenon that sometimes happens in which at the latest days of somebody's life, when they have been for a long period of time with no awareness whatsoever, not recognizing anybody, not being able to talk, all of a sudden they come back, or they wake up one morning and they recognize people, and they tell stories, and they tell who is with them and what they were doing, and all of a sudden they die. I mean, moments after that, hours or a few days. So how can we explain a brain that's completely, just for lack of better word, rotten in a way? It's non-existing anymore. It's all completely damaged. But the person has a lapse of lucidity, of awareness that comes out of the blue. And how can we explain cases in which people are in coma and they see things, or when people are under anesthesia or considered dead and they see events, they see what's going on in the other side of a hospital, and they come and they can tell. And so many cases of children who have had near-death experiences, that they come and report meeting relatives that they never ever knew they had, and telling details. I mean, we have to start putting all of this together, not to be believers, because I think that would be the worst that could happen. Believers, we have read so many in different areas, but to be real scientists, meaning someone who is looking for answers without jumping to conclusion, but we're not rejecting the evidences either. And that is what I think it's so catchy at this point.
Yes, absolutely. And the people that try to explain away these phenomena can do so with one particular class of phenomena, the near-death experience, although there's no accepted way of debunking that experience. But it's when, as you say, you take a collective of all the experiences together that all point to one direction, and add together the evidence that's used to create, to come up with the idea that the brain creates consciousness, evidence which in my opinion can equally lend credence to a filter idea. Plus this extra phenomena, I think that a filter idea is more parsimonious, is a better theory to explain. It encompasses all the data completely. And I think, as you mentioned, one of the most interesting and persuasive evidences for survival is terminal lucidity, which is now called paradoxical lucidity. And I have an interview coming up with Michael Nahm, actually, who's one of the leading researchers in that field. And I'm looking forward to that one because I really do find this phenomena interesting. I've spoken to several people who are sceptical about the idea, and they have come up with explanations including levels of pH in the brain, or perhaps if there's some sort of growth involved, that as the brain declines and degrades, the growth is limited and therefore normal function is able at the end. And there are several, but to me, things like Alzheimer's, which is complete degradation of neuronal connections, the only way you can explain it is by spontaneous regrowth, which in that kind of situation seems very, very unlikely. Not impossible, but very unlikely to me.
Yes.
And as you say, taken together with all this other phenomena of veridical out-of-body perception, various psi experiments, which I'm on the fence about, I haven't really looked into them, reincarnation, I've spoken to several people on that, Dr. Jim Matlock, who's done an extensive research, and all these other things taken together, they do suggest that perhaps a better explanation of tonal lucidity is that it is some kind of separation from that limiting brain, which is allowing more natural, unbinded consciousness to come through. And that's my idea on it. I don't know the physiology, if there are reasonable explanations, but to me I haven't found any. So in your experiences of veridical perception, where you said you've come out of your body and you've seen things you couldn't possibly have known, can you give an example of some of those experiences?
Oh, yes, I have several experiences like that. I guess the strongest one, the strongest evidence is the one that I tell in my TEDx talk, because that is something that I could not even have imagined. And it happened when I was a child. Because once you are an adult, we can and we have to always speculate if it could be something in our subconscious mind, something we saw in a movie. But in the case of the experience that I have had, in which I was very young, I lived in a very small city. I had no access to a television or to a library, very few books, just child book or children's book around. And at that time, I had an experience in which I saw an uncle of mine in a hospital in a large city in Sao Paulo. And I lived in a very small city in a different state. And the vision that I had, seeing him, in post-operatory condition, just recovering in a huge hospital, in a city that I have never seen, in the place where I was born, in the little town I was born. We had few cars. It was at that time really small. So for me, seeing a city when I had so many huge avenues and lots of cars and huge hospital buildings that I have never seen in my life, all of that was puzzling. And I saw details of my uncle's surgery, which I could not have seen. And even details such as seeing like a drain coming from his abdomen and draining some liquid to a glass jar that was on the floor. He had had a bladder surgery, which I only came to know many years later. So that experience to me always continued vivid in my mind, because one thing, Darren, that I think it's very important to discuss and mention when we study about phenomena to prove or bring evidences to the fact that life is not only the physical world, we have to include the subjective condition, which you were saying a little bit at the beginning in our chat before, because some experiences are as vivid and as confirmed as this one I just mentioned as when I was a child. But others, it's like we go to realms of reality that are not so close to our moment here. Also, there are experiences in which they are more premonitory experience. It's precognition. People see things that will happen. And of course, nothing is written on stone. Things may change, but some things we have very strong evidences of happening. And sometimes in these experiences, people see that. But we also have cases of people having clairvoyance. And I'm sure many of those who are watching us will have similar experiences, like as a child, sensing something close by who was no one physical, and in this case, not something, but someone close by who was not physical, or sometimes even seeing, or listening to somebody talking and nobody was around. And then for these children, it can be quite confusing. And at a certain point, they have to shut out of their mind all of the idea that something else continue and exist. But if we look back at all of this, it's so much better if we can educate people to learn to distinguish, and we bring all of this on board. I don't know if you are aware of this, but I am doing a research about children who have had sensitivity to this non-physical reality, subtle energy, whatever we are going to call it, because I include myself among them. And some of my experiences as a child were wonderful, but some were frightening. I don't think they were so negative, but I did not know how to interpret and
Yes.
what to do. And for a child, not knowing what's going on when they are sensing a reality that is not absolutely physical and nobody else around is talking about it, because even if they sense, nobody talks about it, it's almost like a tacit pact, nobody mention it.
Yeah.
And then the child can be very, very confused. I think even for the sake of people growing healthy and knowing what is really happening to them and what's just their imagination and what's the reality, we have to bring more light to this topic.
So how can we differentiate between what is imagination and what is individually perceived reality, as opposed to, other people can't see it? So how do we determine what's imagination and what is there, especially in children?
Especially in children. I think in children it's easier, actually, Darren, because with all of the studies that I have doing, one of the big challenge or the biggest challenge that I have is to create scale. So how can you evaluate an experience saying that is accurate or that's not? There's a certain percentage of imagination. And I ended up developing some tools to try and get it. And what I would say is that for children, it's easier because when a child is just guessing something or trying to pretend, they fall into contradiction. And if you pretend that you are valuing more one aspect, the child will make that aspect sound bigger because they are trying to please or they are trying to
impress.
to impress. But when you are listening to someone, a child or an adult who have had an experience as a child, describing an experience in which it's consistent, especially if it's with a child, and they always go back to the same point, this is very unnatural to be something that has been just imagined. And that's one of the things. The other thing to evaluate that when it comes to examining children's sensitivity in terms of subtle energy, I think is to evaluate if it is the case that the child senses that or behaves in whatever that way is, as if seeing someone who is not present or feeling or saying things that doesn't make sense, to see if that happens everywhere independently of the location or of who is around, or if that is location dependent. Because I have examined some cases in which, for example, someone who now is a medical doctor, is a mother of 2 kids. She's probably now 35 years old, so she's young, very well educated. She had for like 15 years nightmares, same nightmares, when living in one house, and she would never have wherever else she would be. She could not sleep for 22 years with the lights off in that house. Whilst when she just started university, she went to another place and when you are in a dorm, like for students' dorm, that was old, strange, she was alone, and she had no fear whatsoever because she didn't sense around what she was sensing in her place. And then after she graduated and matured, and then she had her kids, and she's talking more frankly and openly about that with her family. And then her father tells her that he always had the same, because the house had been with the family for long generations.
Right.
And her grandfather committed suicide there because of similar things. So if it's her and her brain, how come that only happened in that environment? And if we say, okay, it was from her 10th and 20th, no, whenever she would be outside of that place, even at the same age, she would have completely different experiences. And then she talked to her sister. Her sister had exactly the same visions, exactly the same nightmare. We cannot just say this is an illusion. But of course, we cannot state this is A or B unless we research deeply. But one of the things that I want with my study is to write a book to help parents and to help educators. Because what do you do when you have a child that is maybe too shy, that start being afraid of going out, even in the open, or being afraid of go to sleep? Many cases of children, they are afraid of going to sleep. And I think at certain point in my life that happened just for a brief period, but it did happen for a period. So I don't think this is correct. And we have to bring more light into that. Most people would just say, this is schizophrenia, or this is a spoiled child just trying to call attention, or this is just imagination. Definitely, there are those cases, imagination, a psychological problem, schizophrenia, another mental problem. I'm not discarding them. I'm just saying this does not explain all of the situations. In the same way, when we come to out-of-body experiences, an experience that happened to us while our brain is apparently sleeping, and that we are aware of them, I'm not saying all of them are out-of-body experiences. Many are just dream. Many are just, the brain put it together, 2 plus 2, and it's 4, and it comes as an image. So, of course, so we have to understand and study details. Also, our subconscious mind plays a big role there. But how can we find evidences to separate what's a real experience or a real out-of-body experience or a real near-death experience from other states? And there are ways of knowing. I have been working in this field now. I guess this year it will be 30 years that I have been teaching and doing seminars and doing research. I didn't used to be so open to the public because it was more like teaching those who are interested. Yeah. But from my personal experience, it's, I'm not going even to say how long, probably 50 years that I have been having these experiences and puzzling myself to understand them. And I did read many books. I did went to many groups, and most of the explanations don't fit. They are just mysterious information that is like you are special. And if they are going to explain or study a child that has more of these abilities, I would say it's his predisposition. This is natural to all of us, but some of us are great musicians, and others just can hear a song and distinguish what type of instrument is there. The same thing. Some people are very sensitive and they can perceive this reality beyond the physical world with very fine details, and others not so much. But this is natural. So when it comes to us, for us to understand that and bring together all of those evidences, we have to have a body of information in which we can decipher, or we can at least have some clues to examine the filters of a person and how people interpret reality. Because most of the experience people report, they are there, but how they interpret the explanation they give to it, that's what is different.
Yeah.
And the more we understand about it, the greater service we are going to do to all of us, and to understand what exists beyond this physical world. Death is here. Everybody knows they are going to die, but people live as if they were eternal. And we spend life, worried about things that are common to us. And this is natural. But we know deep down that at the end, that's not what matters the most. And what is it that we are going to leave behind to our society? For how long are we going to live in an era in which anyone who talks about anything that is not physical is considered stupid? In a way, Darren.
Delusional.
I'm generalizing a lot because there are great scientists. And nowadays, more than ever, great minds and very, known and well-respected people studying all of these. But still, if we think about a large area of science, we have a few people understanding this. And I do not think we can positively contribute with our world, with humankind, if we do not bring all of this to the level of a science institution or a scientific study. And by science, I do not mean materialistic, I do not mean close-minded, restrictive. I mean observing things, trying to put evidence together, not jumping into conclusion, not believing in any crazy thing, but putting together, if there are too many crazy things that they are similar, what is in there? And examining who people are, because by talking to someone, we can know if the person can just imagine and create a huge fantasy in their minds, or if the person is very sensible, down to earth, and still is describing what's going on. I mean, I live a completely normal life, and I have had these experiences since ever. I try to contribute to bring a scientific light into this, not because it's a platform and we have to fight for this. No, just because I would love to see every human being understanding better who they are. I think that would bring very positive ethical and inner consequences for everyone. But I'm not sure that is going to happen too soon.
So what do you think of many, in fact I'd probably say the consensus of psychologists and people in the science of psychology would say that, so, for example, your example of the lady who had negative experiences in this particular house, they would say, for instance, well, this lady knew that her grandfather who committed suicide in this house due to similar things has picked up on that, and therefore she has associated that house with negative experiences, and therefore her brain has created this experience, and along with her passing it on to other people. So
Absolutely.
What do you think of
that?
This
Would be a good explanation, I think.
Yes.
The point is that she never knew. She only came to know after she was graduated as a medical doctor and she had a child. And then her father came to the open and spoke to her. She never knew before. Because that is one of the things that I examine a lot. Because we have to see what is the information that people know, what they have heard, around, and they may just unconsciously bring that up. I think this is a very valid point you are bringing there, and we have to always consider that too. In the cases of all of us, whenever I have an experience, I try to think, how much sure I am that was a real experience. I do not know if you hear noise. My cat is jumping around like crazy. Is that disturbing?
No, maybe that's fine. No,
that's fine. Okay. She's here just playing with something. Sorry for that.
It's fine.
Sorry, Darren. Please.
I'm an absolute animal lover. I love animals. That's why it was so hard when we lost our little dogs. I've got the little shrine at the back there with them, so they're always looking over us. So
wonderful.
What do you think of those who would say, yes, all these experiences are very entertaining to listen to, but at the end of the day, it's just anecdotes. It's just anecdotal data that mean really nothing of evidential value. It's hearsay. How do you think of that opinion?
I respect that opinion, because I think people have to go as far as a reality makes sense to them. And this is something that we always have to respect. But I think that anyone who have ever had a little bit more sensitivity to the non-physical world or have had any sort of experience, they would never agree to that. And the number of people who fit into this are large. The problem is that many, they resort to explanations that are just beliefs, religion, or something that satisfies them and makes them feel comfortable. Many are very, very afraid of this reality, because the way we are brought up and the way Hollywood moves somehow shape our minds. We tend to feel that if there is something out there, well, it's a ghost and it's going to threaten me, right? Yeah. And then there has to come an exorcist, and then there's going to be a poltergeist, and then it's evil. And we are somehow taught to behave in this way. And whenever people have any perception, the first thing that they do, I'm not going to say all, I know many that never did, but for most people, the first thing they do is to feel something is wrong. Now, what did I do? And then they're going to pray. I'm not judging any of that. What I'm saying is, what is the level of lack of information that we have? So I totally respect, because I think many people never had an experience, to point them to the fact, to point to them the fact that we have a reality that is beyond just this physical world and this physical body, this physical life. But others, they dispute a lot out of fear, and they will never admit. I have many cases of people who are colleagues, researchers, or people who teach with me at the International Academy of Consciousness, and we try to do a very serious work in clarifying about all of that. But I have many examples of people who had family members who have had lots of experiences, all different types, sensing non-physical presences like someone without physical body, having intuitions, premonitions, having ideas that comes to their mind, out-of-body experiences, seeing things, sensing in different ways, and they do not want even to hear about that, even though their own brother, sister, father, daughter are here teaching about that, because they were scared. Many people had been very scared throughout their early experiences for not having information. And many people start sensing this non-physical reality in environments like the lady I told you about, one of those that I have interviewed and researched about. Like, she was in a house that the energy, the environment, the climate, and the non-physical reality there was not so positive. So for someone in that way who never goes beyond into understand their experience, they may grow with that sense. Whatever is there is horrible. When we know that, when someone have like a near-death experience, a positive one, very clear one, or when someone has a very positive, lucid out-of-body experience, they completely lose fear of death. They completely change their views of life, because the quality of the experience is different. And what I'm trying to say behind it is that someone who never had the experience, they will never agree. You can tell them anything, and they will find an explanation. This is your subconscious mind. This is just because you heard that somewhere and you don't remember. This is just a dream. But whoever had the experience, that experience is completely, absolutely, utterly different than any sort of dream. It cannot be confused. But the only ones who knows that are those who have had the experience. That's why I think anyone who wants to research about this phenomenon, they must have had truthful experiences, real ones, strong ones, because they will be able to understand what's false or truth, what is just an imagination of the brain, which does happen, and what is a fact, a perception that is coming from senses that are beyond the physical senses. If someone tries to understand, to study this, but they comes with a bias in their vision, and they are already knowing that whoever says this, they do not know much about how the brain works, then the person is not going to do a good job. That's why I admire Robert Krukel, that I have mentioned earlier here in our talk, because Robert Krukel, he didn't have experience, but he was unbiased, and he contributed tremendously. So anyone who is unbiased is going to do that, is going to see that. I have done some interviews myself with some people that I admire, and I had the opportunity to meet Peter Fenwick, who studies about the near-death experience. He is one of the pioneers on that. But I also interviewed Jim Tucker, who studies about
reincarnation,
past life recall. Yes, children's experience with past life recall. I think it deserves, for those who are watching us here or listening to us, it deserves to take a look at his research, to see more of that evidence.
And indeed, all the research done by the University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies is a great resource.
It is, yes, and some of the studies of Dr. Yannis Stevens, you cannot just say, this is somebody's imagination. You cannot say that. And at least we have to come with a better explanation. And nowadays, I do not know if you are familiar with this name, Federico Fagin. Federico Fagin is the man who invented the microprocessor. So in other words, the fact that all of us, we can have mini computers, even in our blenders, right? In our car, or we can have a touch phone or anything like that. It comes from his work, and he has been in the field of hard science for so long. But he had an out-of-body experience. And that out-of-body experience changed his view of the world. Nowadays, he's over 70, and he's dedicating to try and create a bridge between the academic mainstream science and an understanding that there are things that are beyond physical, but they are real, and they are part of physics, even if it's not physical in the sense of material. And how can we bridge that? And I'm mentioning this because there's coming a book of this gentleman, Federico Fagin, and I have also interviewed him. He's a friend, and I admire a lot. But I bring this to show how it's not just, crazy people without good information and scientific basis who will discuss about this. There are lots of people questioning and trying to understand about all of these different types of phenomena that points to the fact that life is beyond just the material world. Whatever you want to include the material, you want to include quantum, great. You want to include any other sort of reality, dark matter, whatever, please do. But there are things that are beyond. Sorry, Darren,
That's all right, it's not a problem.
I was so enthusiastic that I kept going on and on.
That's perfect. That's what we need. So, why do you think, if these out-of-body phenomena and various other information reception, clairvoyance and all that sort of thing, is so prominent, and there are indeed people who can go out of body at will and receive very little information, why do you think that there have been no experimentations done on that to really solidly, get somebody who can do this willfully into a lab? Have them give you back information.
Yeah, wonderful question, and wonderful point for us to bring, one which I have lots of information about, because I have dedicated a lot to try and do more research about the out-of-body experience. I know it's a fact, and I try to find different methods, and that's part of what I have dedicated my life to. The problem is that when we talk about proof is as good as the person who examines the proof can understand it. And when people look at these experiments, they are expecting something as objective as would be some experiment with the material world, that whenever you put like a chemical reaction of this element and this element, it will result in that. And if it does not, you have a clear explanation, and if you adjust that, the result will come back to be the one you expected.
Yes, and it will do it every time.
And we also, so the repetition, but also in science, we expect that we can know so much about the phenomenon that we'll be able to predict what's going on.
Future detectable predictions.
Exactly. But now what happens is we are talking about human beings. We are talking about human beings who are dealing with their education, repressions that they might have had, fears that they might have, limitations in how they can control the energies that connect their physical bodies to their non-physical part. We are talking about so many different variables that it's very difficult that we can reproduce and experiment with identical results. So we have had here at the International Academy of Consciousness different experiments, several of them that I have devised myself, some I have devised with my partner, Wagner Legrete, who is, by the way, doing some amazing research with some evidences that are astonishing to anybody, even in the physics, because he has been shown through functional MRI some results of our subtle energy in our bodies. And that's what we need, steps, building steps. But when it comes to putting all of this and doing these experiments, we find some evidences. We have very good experiments. But the next group you put together, next time you do it, it's not the same.
No.
So you would have to find an excellent projector, being able to project outside of their bodies, but with 100% success rate. I completely ignore any case such as this. Everything in terms of the out-of-body experience is a matter of degrees of success. Some people, they try 100 times and they will succeed one, which is not insignificant, because one success can show to an individual so much about life, physical life, life beyond, life and death, and what exists beyond what we call death, that is amazing. But for our way of recognizing what science is, we will consider that, nah, it can't be, because if it were truth, the guy would have done that the other 99 times as well. And some people will have periods in their lives with a greater success rate. But you can never control. And then once you are outside the body, okay, the way we did experiments, we were not trying so much. There's one experiment we did that now comes to my mind that we call projective field. And it was not so much trying to prove the out-of-body experience. I don't think there is something feasible in the world as it is today, because the minority experience out-of-body experiences. Yeah. The majority have some cultural backgrounds that prevent them to being open to the idea. Many, they fear because of beliefs and the way they have been, educated. So we do not expect that, but we expected to bring more information about how the out-of-body experience happens. How can we find ways to help people to experience this more lucidly? And mainly, how the brain brings the information of what has been experienced out there to this level here. Not the brain, the consciousness. Because whatever we experience is beyond the brain. Now we want to recall. We want to have this right now in our minds. Yeah. And we distort reality. If you show the same environment to 5 people, they will pick different elements of that environment, talking about a physical environment. And people have perfect vision. And when it comes to experiencing the out-of-body experience, in bringing the account and whatever they learned out there, this is more complex, because we need to find ways to verify what elements of the description are stronger. We can, how can I say, rely more on that description, and what doesn't make sense. Maybe the person mixed up, maybe the person doesn't remember well. Having said that, Darren, I just want to make a parenthesis. Dreams have no scientific proof. Nobody, if you tell me now that you had a dream just last night and that you were playing basketball, whatever you tell me, I have to accept. Yeah. I have no way of knowing that is true. Actually, when we think about out-of-body experiences, clairvoyance, people seeing ghosts or anything like that, we have many or infinite more evidence or possibilities of identifying if that's true than in the case of a dream. Because people have experiences in which they, for example, foresee the future, or it's not being foreseeing the future, it's like they have an experience in which they see an event that's going to happen. Yeah. And that happens. Okay, so that is something. Or like I did, that I saw something as a child that I could not have seen. You cannot say that is a dream. And whenever we hear somebody telling a dream, it's just purely subjective and we believe. Now, why is it that nobody disputes the fact that dreams may not be real? Because everybody dreams. You dream, I dream. If not everybody, what?
Yeah, the vast
95% of people
majority.
remember. Yes, the vast majority. So there's no discussion. It's a common experience. And in the case of the out of body experience, number one, it's not as common. Number two, it can be very confusing for the person to interpret because it can be very different from the physical reality. And number three, we have a lot of cultural, religious,
Yes.
and different impediments to examining that. So
And
there
you
are
see that as well.
complications.
You see that as well in the near-death experience. The way that Christians will see Jesus, Hindus will see their God, Islam, Muslims will see Muhammad. So the question is it completely culturally determined or is it culturally influenced?
Yes, that's a good point. I have been in some programs, especially one that comes to my mind once I have been to Cyprus.
Oh, we're
And
going there in a few months. Nice
oh
place.
yes,
And
and
I'm
that's a
terrified of
wonderful
flying,
place.
so that will be fun. If the
That
COVID
is a
situation
wonderful
improves.
place. Very different, culturally speaking, from
Yes.
what we are used to, even though it's still in Europe. But when I was there, I was in an interview show that now doesn't exist anymore. They are very close to these ideas because at that time, at least, they were very religiously closed, very orthodox religions. And I was in this interview, and people would phone and ask questions. And I heard people there telling me over there online so many interesting experiences, amazing experiences that would bring so much to the table for us to reinforce some of these theories that we are talking about. But at the end, they conclude their accounts saying, and I know that was a messenger of God. And I know God sent that to me. And I know this was a gift from God. And in my mind, I think, how can somebody not see what they are experiencing? I'll tell you the last story. Once I had a friend that told me that she once saw herself outside the body in her bedroom. And she was so lucid, so lucid, so lucid. And she looked at her body and she started screaming, I'm dead, outside the body, in her mind. Of course, there's no screaming when we are outside the body. But her attitude was like, I'm dead. And then when she told me, I said, funny, right? Because if you were dead, you could not know you were dead and you could not say you were dead. Therefore, if you were thinking you were dead, you were not dead. But you see, the belief, the fear comes and kick in so fast that we don't think.
Indeed. That's true. And indeed, the idea of death, maybe with these experiences in mind, isn't exactly death as we believe it to be. So what do you think of, I was recently reading actually today, so it's good time to bring it up because it's fresh, Dr. Sean Carroll, who's a very talented, intelligent scientist, he's a theoretical physicist, who claims it's very, very, very unlikely, almost impossible, that there is any form of afterlife or life after without physical working brain, because he says the laws of everyday physics are completely understood and there's no room. If there was something interacting with the physical brain, because it's physical, there would be some remnant energy or something to measure. I suppose if something non-physical is interacting with physical on any level, there will be signs, and yet that's never been found. So what do you think about his opinion there?
I respect a lot, deeply, but I completely disagree in many different levels, because I think there are many experience and scientific tools, instruments trying to be discovered, established, that through technology can evidence some of this non-physical reality. One of them, for example, the experiment that I mentioned that Wagner Allegretti is doing, I'm very familiar with because I helped in many of his test sessions. And the evidences of that, Darren, maybe one day you want to talk to him about that, but the evidences of that cannot be dismissed by science. And he has already presented that to many, many very academic, conventional scientists, and it's mind-puzzling. So I disagree that we have zero evidences of that. There are many different studies that point to the fact that something exists, and all of these experiences, and even if we call it anecdotal experiences, there are facts there that also deserve to be studied. But I respect the opinion. I disagree. And I also know that many different areas and many different scientists are dedicating to study how we bridge the knowledge between physical and the non-physical reality. The fact is, if we think and if we agree with this reasoning of his, if there were, we would have already identified. And if there were, we would have means of measuring it. That means we are not going to discover anything new. So therefore, whatever we have in our technology and knowledge right now is what it is. So I think there's little room there for changing our minds and finding something new.
Yes. So what do you, my channel or my investigators are mainly on the question of what happens after physical death, what our experience is after physical death. So from the evidence that you've seen and the experiences you've had and research, what do you think, I suppose, is the narrative of what happens to us after physical death?
I can tell a little bit about what I have seen and I have experienced. And that is, of course, is a fragment of the reality that I have been able to witness. And I would love also to reference some of the research that has been done and some of what is the consensus, which does not mean it's rigid. We are growing, we are learning. And this is a knowledge that needs to become more well established. But according to my experience, I have seen environments, not so easy to tell in words,
No, in language.
but I have seen cases, for example, in which people are between lives in a situation that they are not so well. They do not know exactly what life is. In the same way here, people are not so sure if that's only physical, if we die when our physical body dies and what we should believe. We also see people like that outside of our bodies. But it doesn't mean when we have, for example, an out-of-body experience, you immediately see people like this. No, we are experiencing the world on our own. And sometimes we get to communicate with some of these consciousnesses. So I've seen some that are in conditions that are not so nice in terms of their lucidity. They are not clear of what's going on. But I have also had opportunities of seeing people in between lives that they seemed, from what I could grasp from that experience, and that is one experience, but to me was very strong and very vivid, and I tried to make sense to that. I've seen situations in which it seemed people were trying to get prepared and trying to understand what is life about, because if indeed we have one life after another, and I think that makes sense, besides my own experience, I think it makes sense to explain so many different evidences that we have. It's a model that fits. And if we go with that, in a case like this, when somebody is in between life, and if they are going to be born again, how does this happen? I do not have the answer. I have some theories of mine. I do not have the answer, but it seems in a way, people are going to get closer to this denser dimension. And by people, I mean consciousnesses, selves, whatever we call ourselves. I wouldn't say physical bodies. We are not the physical body, although we identify so much with the physical body now. But I've seen some of them getting ready to be born. And to me, I understood as being ready to be born. And to me, that was, for me, up to today, my strongest experience, the one that I value the most, was not the longest, was not the most interesting in terms of details, but for me, in terms of meaning, it had the strongest effect. Yes, in terms of meaning of life, was very impactful, because it was almost in that moment, I could understand and participate in how puzzling it is to start inhabiting a new body in a new family, not knowing how much you will remember of what you already knew. And it's not true that we don't remember. Whoever we are is inside of us. But society somehow influence a lot what facet of us we are going to manifest. If we have had nice parents or parents that beat us like hell, it's going to make a difference for what side of us we are going to show in this life, because we have many different aspects of our personalities. So I think that expectation of not knowing exactly how we will handle that future life, that is a little of what I sensed there. And to me, my mind was almost as if people trying to understand what are the difficulties, to try to avoid some of the traps that being, I'm going to use a horrible word, but not meaning that literally. But in a way, what means being entrapped inside of a physical body means to a consciousness who before were free in this
completely unlimited,
spiritual, non-physical dimension. Exactly.
So
that for me was my most impactful. And of course, many studies of near-death experiences and deathbed phenomena bring some evidences, or at least some theories about what life beyond this life is.
yes.
But I think sometimes when we study only one type of experience, we see only one side of the reality. And when we study, sorry to make that point, Darren,
That's fine.
when we study a near-death experience, which I study a lot, but near-death experience is one type of out-of-body experience that happens under specific circumstance that teaches us a lot, especially because the near-death experience is more, maybe is a stronger evidence to science because the person was brain dead.
Yes.
So it brings more attention. But when we think in terms of what that represents, the phenomenon, that is much more limited than the general out-of-body experience, because you can have many different types of out-of-body experiences. So I like bringing the out-of-body experience on board as a tool for us to understand life and death and what it means to be here. That's what I think the out-of-body experience is. And that's why we teach out-of-body experience, and that's why we try to help people to get rid of fears and beliefs. Not because beliefs are wrong, but because let's try and see the reality as close to what it is as possible.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, when I was trying to achieve out-of-body experiences, I was using Robert Monroe's Gateway Experience tapes. I would have liked to have gone out there and done the course, but A, I didn't have the money, and B, I was terrified of flying and still am, so that's not on the cards. But I never really managed to get there, although I did have some strange experiences. I must try again one day and really look into this a bit more. Why do you think, if our consciousness is a separate entity that can function outside of the physical brain, why do you think things like general anesthesia have effect and is able to take experience away, and brain damage is able to change our experience and our mind? Why do you think that has an effect if our consciousness is pure and separate in a way?
Pure non-physical, pure beyond physical, that's what you mean, right?
Yes.
Darren, I understood you. Okay. I think that this physical reality is an interface. And if the interface is not working properly, it's going to be so much harder for us to be able to manifest and bring any real clarity of who we are and our understanding of life in a multidimensional way, in a spiritual way, beyond this life. So when the brain is not properly fed with information, unbiased information, or when we are with a brain damage or something like that, that is going to be much, much harder. As will if somebody has been brainwashed to believe all of this is something that shouldn't be discussed. Or if the person is brainwashed to believe this is dangerous, that will also interfere. So as an interface, we have to take care and to be able to decipher what this interface is capable of really decoding, allowing to come here to this physical level or to this conscious level of information of us.
Because it's just, I ask, because many people I've seen will say that things such as general anesthesia taking away all experience and Alzheimer's causing such a distinct change, all of which are physical things. Surely that wouldn't be the case if consciousness was interfacing, because the core awareness would always be there.
I'm sorry there, I could not follow you for a moment. My my sound interrupted here. Could
Not
you
a problem.
repeat, please?
Sure. So many people that I've seen have said that experiences such as, or phenomena such as Alzheimer's disease and the effects of general anesthesia, which takes consciousness away, shouldn't have an effect on our mind or our consciousness if consciousness is this separate entity which is interacting with the brain, because that consciousness would always be there and shouldn't be touched by changing the brain. What do you think of that?
I agree with that in a way. That is a correct statement, but it's a partial statement. Why is it? Because anything we experience, even if that is an unconscious experience, suppose, for example, Darren, tonight you have an out-of-body experience, but that out-of-body experience for you is something that you don't remember. So for all matters that is practical in life, you don't know you have had that. Yeah, it didn't happen. But inside of you, you start having a feeling that something is true about the out-of-body experience, even though you never had one. And you start being able to read accounts of out-of-body experience and say, this one makes sense. This one is too crazy. Something here, it's like the guy is faking it. How do you know if you never had one?
Yeah.
And also, here, we are a result of what we have experienced in so many lifetimes. If we are now a result of that, and talking about this, I bring my own experience, but I bring lots of research about past life recollection. If that is a fact, that is not in our brain. We have not experienced situations of past lives with this brain, but the information, the knowledge is with us. So I completely agree that whatever the consciousness experience is with the consciousness independently of the brain, even if the brain cannot get it now because the brain is damaged, the information is there. So, but in reality, here in this life, it is as if it were not there. You were mentioning something there before, and I was going to comment something about techniques to leave the body for out-of-body experience.
Yes.
And that is one of the things that are most puzzling. Because why is it that some people find it so easy to have out-of-body experiences? And by having said that, I'm going to make a parenthesis. Most of them who find it easy, they have spontaneous out-of-body experience. But it's possible to produce at will. But why is it that for some people it's easy and for others it's so hard and they try and don't get it? And there are many different factors in relation to experiences, because some, they use more, for example, our awareness of the non-physical reality. Some, they're going to try to trick our brain to not paying attention to details of the physical world. Some, they are going to work to make our energetic connection, the energy interface between the physical and the non-physical bodies, more loose and more melt down so that it's easier for us to disconnect. Each technique uses different approach, and no technique is perfect to everybody. So we have to adjust. So I think in terms of that, and I'm saying this because I want to encourage you to go back to trying and maybe having some nice adventures by yourself.
Yes, that'd be good.
So the key to that is understanding how the out-of-body experience works. What is the process that is in there? I see lots of people talking about the out-of-body experience and telling their experiences, but I see very few people explaining why and how. And I saw this outside the body, but why? What is operating there? Why you saw in this way and the other one saw in that way?
Yes.
Very few people really want to go into understanding the mechanism of that. But in my opinion, and the way we work here, when we research and we do anything with the organization that I work with, we try to understand why. We think that is fundamental to, the core of developing all of these we are talking about. So that is something I want to say here, because many people, they say, well, if you were born with this gift, you will have out-of-body experience, and some were not. That is not true. We can learn. The point is to identify what's blocking it. Sometimes that can be complex.
When I've tried before, I try listening to tutorials on YouTube or guided meditation and things like that, and where I get stuck is they say, so lie down, close your eyes, go through your breathing, And now imagine your astral arm raising, and raise your arm. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, if I raise my arm, I'm going to raise my arm, and then I'm going to be out. So I can't imagine my arm raising and feel it at the same time. It's just an image in my mind that I can see in my arm raising, but there's no feeling. Because they say, feel your astral body sitting up, feel your arm raising. I can't do that without actually raising my arm or sitting up.
Yes.
And
sorry.
I was just going to say, and I
I
can't really see how you can transfer imagination of imagining yourself as a non-physical body into actually becoming that.
You see, each of us, we have a different characteristic of approaching life and how it's almost like an approach of how we use our will. And evidently, by talking to you and so logical everything you are saying, the way you reason, you are the type of person that you examine things. Mm. So while you are doing that, you are trying to understand, but why would that work? And that's a logical question. Why would that work? Why am I going to imagine my arms lifting? And if it's going to lift and I am with my arm here, what am I going to sense? And how can I do that? And the other point, if you can lift your arm up, I mean your non-physical arm, right? The arm of your non-physical body. If you can lift this one up, you can lift the whole body, and then you can have an out-of-body experience. All of these are logical reasonings and conclusions from the experience. However, some people, they have a way of approaching the experience, which is not my style either. So I totally understand you. I need different techniques. But some people, you just tell them, okay, concentrate on this, and they don't question. It's the type of approach that the person just do. They are not thinking why. But you are thinking why, you are thinking how. And while you are sensing it, you are trying to explain what is it that you are sensing. Is it real? And you are examining why it's happening. So it creates a situation in which while something is going to start happening with your energy level or your non-physical body, your physical brain is so active and paying so much attention that you bring your focus and your awareness to the physical world, into the physical body. That makes it very, very, very hard. To be able to produce this connection at will, we need to find tools, mechanisms for us, at least for a brief moment of time, to forget our physical body and to relax so much that you cannot sense it. Suppose you think like this. I do not know if you ever got to this point there, in which you think, am I sensing my legs? Wow, it's almost as if I don't have legs. Have you ever had that?
Yeah.
That's perfect. That is the point of relaxation we need. And we go into that so deeply, so deeply. Once you get to that, all you have to do is nothing, but really nothing. You stay awake, calm, enjoying, do nothing. Because little by little, in the same way as somebody under deep anesthesia or somebody who is in a cardiac arrest and the body is failing, the metabolism goes down so much that it seems our energy start getting loose and we start to disconnect a little. And then if you maintain yourself neutral and conscious long enough at that point with no expectation, and that is very important. That's why I said doing nothing, no expectation, just there enjoying, knowing there's a reality beyond the physical world, but doing nothing really. Then things start happening and you witness. It's better in this way than you trying to create the position of disconnecting, because for you, that's not going to work. When I was a child, I have had many, many experiences in which my arms and my body would disconnect. It was so easy for me to leave the body. Nowadays, it's not anymore, unfortunately. But I know what that feels like. And sometimes there, I would sit, I got so used to that I would sit and relax. And I would just allow it to happen. I was not doing it. I did not know what to do. But I would allow it to happen. And then, for example, an arm or a leg or my whole body would get non-aligned with the physical body. And once you have, for example, your arm non-aligned, suppose it really disconnect, It's amazing because you can have your eyes open. You see your arm there, the physical one. But for all practical purpose, this is your arm. This is what you sense as lucidly, as clearly as you would sense your physical body. And you can even, to some degree, if the person is at the right tune there, be able to move it. And that's the essence of the out-of-body experience.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Seeking Eye Life Exploration podcast. If you did and would like to continue following my research, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel and following the podcast on Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, and other podcast providers. You can also join our Facebook discussion group. You can find the link to this and other Seeking Eye online profiles at seeking-eye.com. Thank you.